chapter 7. All right, so I'm going to have to ramp up the instruction a little bit. The social cognitive approach. The idea that people can learn by watching others. That's it. Behaviorism was all about learning through what happens to you after you do something. Is there reinforcement or is there punishment? Does something good happen? Does something bad happen? Well, the idea of social cognitive or social learning theory is that a lot of learning can occur simply by watching what happens to others when they do things, with our example of punishment. And that's why a lot of punishment is effective in the classroom, is that not only do you learn by being punished or reinforced, but you see what happens to other people, and that can affect your behavior. People can learn by observing the behaviors of others, who are called models, and the outcomes of those behaviors. So don't simply tell me that you learn because you watch what other people do. You learn and you imitate behavior because you also see what happens to them after they do that. If I went around screaming through the hallways, you would not imitate my behavior unless you also thought about what's the consequences of my behavior. Was that also fun? Did people praise me for that? Then you're likely to do that. If I get punished for that, you're less likely to do that. Learning can occur without a change in behavior. Sometimes the change in behavior may come later. If you observe somebody getting spanked, you may not perform that particular behavior, or it may have an effect later on. And especially observing capital punishment for murder. In the old days, there used to be public executions. Now you have to drive all the way over to Huntsville and get a special pass if you want to watch an execution. Right. How many of you have done that? Oh, okay. The reason why there used to be public hanging, stuff like that, is that they hoped that that would deter other people from murdering, killing, stuff like that. And it's difficult to measure a change in behavior when you watch somebody go to life in prison or be executed for murder, because the behavior that you're imitating then is not killing people. And how do you observe that in someone? I can say, like, right now all of you are not killing anyone. You must have learned, huh? There must have been some learning that occurred. That's a difficult one to measure. The consequences of behavior play a role in learning. In other words, what happens to you personally. But that's less critical now than earlier with operant conditioning. In other words, what's important with the social cognitive approach is seeing what also happens to others. And then cognition plays a role in learning. Awareness, expectations, attention, retention. We'll talk about all those. But when you're watching to see what happens to others, you're being aware of the behavior and the contingency that follows in terms of reinforcement or punishment. Okay, and I'm going to move along kind of quickly through these since you don't need to copy down everything right now. I'm going to put these up on Blackboard. Generalized imitation. This is straight from the book. Intermittent reinforcement of imitation creates an imitation habit. Intermittent reinforcement means that you're reinforced occasionally, pretty consistently. But an imitation habit means that you've learned to imitate somebody else's behavior consistently. How the environment reinforces and punishes modeling, there's 4 ways. One is the observer is reinforced or punished by the model. Example of that, people are accepted by those they imitate. You'll see this in school all the time. If kids start dressing and acting like somebody else, usually they're accepted into their group. The observer can be reinforced or punished by a third person. For example, children win approval from their parents if they imitate their older siblings' good behavior. So the reinforcement can come from someone else other than the one you're imitating. The observer can also be reinforced or punished by the consequences of imitation. If I start acting in this way, what happens to me? For example, impersonating a celebrity leads to privileges. Kind of an extreme example, but you might think of overall good behavior and good things happen to you. And then finally, the one that's most relevant here in this chapter, the observer is reinforced or punished by the consequences of the model's behavior. This is what we mean by vicarious reinforcement or punishment. In other words, you are living vicariously through someone else. If I watch my sibling, my brother, clean his room, and my parents come by and praise him, then my behavior is affected by simply watching what happened to him after he performed a particular behavior. Then I might be likely to go clean my room with the expectation that I would get that praise also. Now this is the thing that behaviorism had a tough time with, because why would the kid go and clean his room? He wasn't reinforced in any way. The reinforcement was given to someone else. That's vicarious reinforcement. And it comes with the notion of expectation. You perform that behavior because you're expecting that the same thing will happen to you. Child observes older sibling punished for hitting. Or the example of in the classroom here for having to go to the principal's office. I would expect that most students then would think it's probably not a good idea to sing in class if that happens. Or even if you see, like stopping as the teacher's walking back. Gee, that was kind of uncomfortable. And he kind of looked, not so cool doing that. Maybe I won't do that then either. I'm gonna skip this because I don't like it. Yeah. I don't like this either. I'm gonna skip this. Okay, cognitive factors in social learning. Learning can occur without performance. You can exhibit learning without any type of change in behavior whatsoever. That's the main contribution of social cognitive theory to behaviorism, is that you don't have to see an actual change in behavior. The vicarious acquisition, where there's no imitation whatsoever, but you've learned not to do something because of watching someone else, in terms of what happened to them. Cognitive processing during learning, the attention, the retention, remembering the steps, attending closely. Expectations are cognitive factors. It's when you're expecting that something's going to happen. They did an experiment where a monkey was in a cage, and he was sitting there looking outside, and they brought by a bunch of bananas that monkeys love. And they went over and sat it on the ground about 50 feet away from the cage, and they took a basket and dumped it upside down and covered the bananas. They walked over, took the pin out of the monkey's cage, opened it up, and the monkey ran right over to the basket, dumped it over. The bananas were gone. There's a little trap door, a really cruel trick you can play on a monkey. The monkey didn't just sit there, but instead pointed and screamed and jumped up and down where the bananas were supposed to be. That's expectation. That's cognitive processing, watching, attending to things, and also knowing that something should happen if I run over them. Expectations. Outcome expectations in terms of what will happen. There's also incentive, anticipating reinforcement. This should happen to me if I do this. Most of you are thinking if you study hard, you should get a good score on the quiz next Tuesday. If that does not happen, you will be upset. Believe me, I've seen that happen before. I'm hoping it doesn't happen to you, but I've seen students be upset when they've expected something. And then efficacy expectations. Can I do it? Can I be successful at that? Do I have the physical ability to succeed at that particular task? Those are all cognitive factors related to expectations. And then awareness of response, consequence, contingencies. If I do this, here's the consequence that should happen. And why do I believe this? Because I've watched it happen to someone else. I've seen other people do this. Here's what usually happens to them. That's it. Okay, any questions so far? I know I'm kind of going through an accelerated pace here. Reciprocal causation is the notion that the person, behavior, environment can all affect each other in terms of changes in their behavior. And if you've taken intro psych before, you know that's related to Albert Bandura's theory. And this is a major step beyond behaviorism. I spend a lot of time. Modeling. How many of you have done some modeling? Different type of modeling. 3 types of models: live, symbolic, and verbal instruction. See, I didn't have enough space to write verbal instruction, so I put VI on there. That's not 6, that's verbal instructions. A live model would be a person that you're watching in person and imitating their behavior. Symbolic model is someone you're either reading about in a book, watching on TV, and then verbal instruction would be like if you're reading, you know, like how to swing a golf club, and they're giving you verbal instructions. That's it. That's the other type of modeling that can occur, sort of a step-by-step instruction. Behaviors that can be learned through modeling. Academic skills that has research support. Academic skills can be taught through modeling. Cognitive modeling, thinking aloud, talking about how you approach a problem, how you're going to study, things like that. Aggression can be learned through modeling. How many of you read about the classic experiment with the Bobo doll? Any of you? What's a Bobo doll?
They watched.
No, you're getting into what they did. What is a Bobo doll?
It's one of those things that you punch and it comes back.
That's right. It's got like the little lead weights in the bottom, and it's a blow-up punching bag type thing. Yeah. So those are really cool. You could knock the living hell out of those things, and they kept popping up for more when I was a kid. So those are pretty neat. All right. So the experiment with the Bobo doll. You wanted to go into that, I think.
They allowed the kids to watch a grown-up attack this Bobo doll,
right.
Really hit him, and then they let them go in there, and they not only did what the parents did, but would even go beyond that, and would do even more, and like use other things that they did.
Okay, good. So you can learn aggression by watching other people in terms of what they do, but the part of that experiment that was most fascinating is that when they had kids watch other kids with the Bobo doll, they had them be aggressive and either get punished for it or be rewarded for it, be reinforced for being aggressive with the Bobo doll. And depending on what happened to them after they were aggressive, that determined whether they were aggressive or not when left with the Bobo doll on their own. So they watched the consequence of the behavior of the other child with the Bobo doll and found that if he or she was rewarded, then I'm likely to go in there and be aggressive also. But if they were punished, they were less likely to be aggressive with the Bobo doll. Same thing with television. You can learn to be aggressive through watching television. Now, when I was younger, I used to think like, oh, what are these people worried about? I don't want them restricting the types of television I can watch. They don't know what they're talking about. It's okay if I watch, you know, some bang bang shoot 'em up things, maybe some karate stuff going on, people getting beat up. That's no big deal. That's not going to affect my behavior. Yeah, there's research studies that set kids in front of shows like that versus other shows with no violence, and then they watch them out on the playground in play situations with other kids. And guess what? They are more aggressive if they watch aggressive shows. I've watched my own son have his friends over, they're watching Power Rangers, and then the show goes off, they go out on the trampoline, and they beat the living hell out of each other on the trampoline. It's real simple. Kids imitate what they see on TV. Now it's even worse with video games. And I wasn't so much in the video game era when I grew up, but now there's lots of video games out, and a lot of really aggressive video games. And kids who play aggressive video games are more likely to be aggressive in social situations than kids who don't. That's a fact. So if you're wondering, you know, like how could I possibly control how aggressive my child might be, how socially appropriate they might act, the stuff they watch on TV and the stuff they play in video games does have an effect. Now some people argue that, well, isn't it better for them to get that out of their system in a video game than rather doing it in person with somebody else? No, it's not cathartic. It's not cathartic in the sense that it gets it out of your system. It actually creates more aggression. The other thing that can be learned through modeling is morality, and they give the example of the Mr. Rogers television show. The Mr. Rogers Show, which was the longest running and the first of the kids shows that actually promoted good types of things. Knock it as much as you want. Some of you might have made fun of Mr. Rogers and some of his mannerisms and things like that. But you can show that when kids watch shows like that, as opposed to shows that are neutral and don't cover anything, kids will display more pro-social behaviors out on the playground and other situations after watching shows like that. That's why, like PBS, public television, and like Nick Jr. and stuff like that, they have shows on them that are very pro-social. Now, just Nick.com, or just Nick by itself, you know, with like cartoons like Cat Dog and Rugrats, stuff like that, those are not the pro-social cartoons. Those are actually sort of anti-pro-social. Those have a lot of undesirable behaviors modeled on there. Okay, processes necessary for effective modeling to occur. Attention, you must attend to significant aspects of the behavior, and then you must retain them either through rehearsal, something like that. Motor reproduction, you must have an opportunity to physically replicate the behavior. And then motivation, you must want to demonstrate the learned behavior. And think about that. What if I was teaching you how to spin a basketball on your fingertip? You would need to attend to what I'm doing. You need to remember what I'm doing. You would need a chance to physically practice that yourself. And then you'd have to be motivated. Most of you aren't motivated to know how to spin a basketball on your finger. But you'd have to be motivated. And those are the 4 steps you need for me to effectively model a particular behavior. Any questions so far? I know I'm skimming along here pretty quickly. Cover a few more things, we'll get out of here. Effects of modeling on behavior. Modeling can teach new behaviors. Modeling can influence the frequency of previously learned behaviors. You might have already learned how to do something, but once you see somebody else doing it, depending on what happens to that other person, that may increase your frequency or decrease your frequency of that learned behavior. So those are called facilitation and inhibition effects. I know how to make my bed, but I may start doing it more if I watch somebody else getting reinforced for that. And not so much for me as an adult now, probably as a kid. Modeling may encourage previously forbidden behaviors. That's called the disinhibition effect. The chewing tobacco example. If I see somebody on TV that I think is pretty cool, and I see that they're chewing tobacco, I may have stopped that before, I may pick it back up. Especially if I see that good things happen, like fame and celebrity to that person. Back in the 70s, everybody chewed tobacco. All the football players chewed tobacco. Baseball players. Baseball still somewhat, but a lot more sunflower female ways. Did I say that politically correct enough? Okay, good. Didn't offend anyone? The model's behavior is relevant to the observer's situation. I'm not going to imitate, even if I think a person has a lot of power and stuff like that. Let's take like, maybe a famous ice skater or something like that. I'm not going to imitate that behavior because it's not relevant to my situation, even though the person may be competent and have power and stuff like that. There was a commercial several years back. Charles Barkley, who played basketball, came on and said, "I am not a role model." And his purpose, said that I'm here to wreak havoc on the basketball court. I'm an enforcer. Don't let your kid imitate my behavior. You got no choice. Charles Barkley was a role model, still is. Little kids look to adults, and simply because you're an adult, you have prestige and power, they will imitate your behavior. Flower seeds and gum now than chewing tobacco, which is good, probably a lot less mouth cancer. Modeling increases the frequency of similar behaviors. So, you might do other things that are consistent with that particular behavior you're watching if you watch a successful model do that. In terms of my models, other professors, people who are famous in my field or something like that, I might not necessarily do the same thing they do, but I might try to do things to be successful in my area because I see what happens to them for doing that. All right, here's a good one. Characteristics of effective models. How do we determine if a child is going to imitate a particular person? One is the model is competent. We don't imitate people we think are incompetent. The model has prestige and power. Those are ones we're more likely to imitate. The model behaves in stereotypical gender-appropriate ways. Now that's for most, not necessarily everyone, but typically little boys will imitate the behavior of stereotypically manly males. And little girls will imitate the behavior of women who behave in stereotypically